hi everyone, this works, right?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation and for having us here. It has been a pleasure these days. And I think that I can extend, we are really enjoying the conference, and yeah, and the environment and the city Ljubljana is amazing. So, and we would also like to thank the organizers for their amazing job and hard work, and all the technicians that made this marvelous event possible. So thank you very much. And I wanted also to thank Teresa to accept this crazy idea to come into a Hegelian community independently, that it's not her research and maybe main interest field, but yeah, she accepted, and also to accept my craziness in, yeah, trying to approach this kind of experiment that we have here. So I wanted to just justify or explain a little bit why we are working together and why I decided to suggest this collaboration with her. So when Luca invited me to come here and I saw the topic, the difference of the sexes, the first thing I thought, oh, this topic is not for me, because I'm working on the logic, so I really don't know a lot about feminism, so I don't have anything to talk about. But Teresa does, and she is working on a philosopher that her philosophical potential for the field in which she is maybe inserted is not usually made enough explicit. So I just decided, okay, I can come only if and only if Teresa can come and we can do something together, because maybe I can say some things about Hegel, but she definitely knows about the difference of the sexes. So yeah, and also this idea emerged from the discussions of the last 3 years. As you can see, we are very good friends, and we've been working on our dissertations in the same office and discussing really, really often. So I really thought that a connection between Françoise Collin and Hegel would be possible. She was skeptical, and I understand, but this was the perfect occasion to just try to, yeah, approach for the first time this connection. Also, I have to say that her dissertation is the second ever on Françoise Collin. This means that there's not a lot of secondary scholarship, and that maybe there are some scholars in feminism that know a little bit on Françoise Collin or can locate Françoise Collin in the discussion on the difference of the sexes on feminism, but she's, I think it's maybe one of the first attempts of putting Françoise Collin into dialogue with a modern philosopher. So, I mean, it's really an experiment.
All right, let's do this. Thank you so much. I was not expecting that much of an introduction, so let's go. If Collin heard that she is being put alongside Hegel in her approach of the difference of the sexes, she would most probably rise from the grave to avoid such an association. The main cause of her discontent, we assume, has to do with the reception of Hegel that she inherited, especially with regards to a political philosophy, which is what concerns us here. She basically inherited Kojève's Hegel as presented around the 1960s, which was directly related to Marxism and which presented some great confusion regarding the understanding of some of Hegel's ideas. However, if we present a different interpretation of these Hegelian ideas, then maybe Hegel's approach to the notion of the difference and its impact on language and politics would not be cause for Collin's protest, and maybe she would rise from the grave motivated by interest and not disagreement. Nonetheless, we are sure that we would continue to be the recipient of some sharp replies as she smiled ironically and listened closely to our talk. So we are going to show here how Collin's problematization of the difference of the sexes can be read along with Hegel's philosophy, at least with regards to both philosophers having a similar conceptual concern. It is for this reason that our talk focuses on the concept of the difference of the sexes as Collin presented it, and then links it to Hegel's notion of limit. By doing this, we hope to show the problem of the difference of the sexes in its specificity as a self-standing problem, and once it has been shown, then introduce Hegel's philosophy as compatible with such a conception. We would also like to point out that our approach is not concerned with what Collin or Hegel really meant, but what their text and their thought allow us to continue doing once we have engaged with them and take them as valid interlocutors of our work. As Lucy de Grey underscored in the beginning of Éthique de la différence sexuelle, sexual difference as a problem, not as a definition, defines our epoch. A once taken as natural fact and unquestioningly ignored throughout the history of philosophy, the question of sexual difference often plays out as an over-determining element or as a complete blind spot within the field of philosophical reflection. Within the history of philosophy, it is a question, a tension within philosophical thought, of which we could possibly draw a genealogy, this will not be done today, that would show not only what has been said and repeated to exhaustion, but also what has been kept quiet. As a thematized philosophical concern, it is a question that in Europe bursts open in all its force and complexity with the feminist movements starting in the 1970s and in French philosophy with the so-called devenue femme of philosophy in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Throughout her work since the 1970s, Collin struggled with and thematized the question of the difference of the sexes, both as a philosopher and as a feminist. By the 1990s, she concluded that the problem of the difference of the sexes had transformed from a metaphysics of the sexes to a difference of the sexes as praxis. That the difference of the sexes has become a practice means that it is no longer predetermined, but at stake in every relationship. It is at stake in relationships between men and women and between men, and between a woman and herself, and a man and himself. We could probably open this up to others. So the thing is, Collin does focus on men and women, but her definition of the sexes is not necessarily dual. I want to point this out. Although she does usually speak of men and women, that's her main concern. It also means that the relationships that are established instantiate and transform this difference without denying that this difference is there. In the case of Praxis de la différence, note sur le tragique du sujet, her presentation is spurred by the question of the subject of feminism, the feminist discussion par excellence throughout the decade of the 1990s. Her article was published in 1992. Unlike other feminists of the time, she had no intention of reaffirming women as the subject of feminism by giving a definition of what a woman is, but rather chose to focus on the woman subject, which she then extends to the philosophical problem of subjectivity. I would like to point out that Collin was not a systematic thinker. This does not mean she was not rigorous and careful. What it does mean is that her articles generally answer to concrete issues of her time, especially regarding the feminist movement. And even more importantly, it also means that her thinking answers at all times to the problem at hand, in this case, the difference of the sexes. Precisely because the nature of the difference of the sexes cannot be fixed, because it has become a praxis, her thinking of it cannot be fixed either. All of this to say, basically, that her thought is not, and most of all did not aspire to be, complete in its details, even if persistently consistent in the questions. If we were to look closely at how she examines the difference of the sexes in other articles, we would see that what she does is slightly different to what I am presenting here. It is for this reason and for the sake of clarity that I will remain attached to the article Praxis de la différence, note sur le tragique du sujet, published in Les Cahiers du Griffe in 1992. Collin's strength lies in a philosophically complex approach to the difference of the sexes that, despite sharing the theoretical and conceptual pertinence of philosophy's awakening to the non-one, the death of the subject, and the end of metaphysics, in favor of other types of ontologies and ethics and etc., nonetheless never stops asking the political question regarding the nature of oppression and the available strategies against it. In her case, she focused on oppression concerning women, although she never undermined the importance of other types of oppression. To explore this oppression, her inquiry into the difference of the sexes refuses to lose sight of the empirical group sociologically conformed by women and the political problems they face. A problem that cannot be reduced to the ontological contraposition between the feminine and the masculine. Collin's understanding of difference is in accordance to her own time. The question is not how to explain the appearance of difference in relation to identity, which she sometimes expresses as some sort of underlying substance of sameness, but to contend with the fact that there are differences because reality is different. In this sense, Hannah Arendt's The Life of the Mind is illuminating. In it, Arendt states that being is appearance, a statement that is not only political, as it might be understood in the human condition, for example, when she claims that Earth is not inhabited by man, singular capital M, but by man, plural, but ontological. So it's not just a political statement, but also an ontological one. Regarding the difference of the sexes, in Praxis de la Différence, Collin underscores two main conflicts. On the one hand, the one presented between philosophy and feminism as to the nature of subjectivity, specifically with regards to the ontological category of the feminine. On the other hand, the one presented both in philosophy and in feminism as to the nature of the difference between the sexes and the ontological categories of feminine and masculine. I focus here on the second point, that is, on philosophy's and feminism's approach to the nature of the difference of the sexes, and Collin's claim that, regarding the treatment of this difference, theories can be distributed as following either the universalist claim or a differentialist claim. It's important to say that she's really simplifying it here, so it's obvious that most philosophers and feminists who deal with this issue are not that simple. Okay, so we're just kind of going to give this general approach. The universalist approach highlights the social construction of the difference of the sexes and claims that ultimately, once this social construction of oppression is overcome, so will difference itself. We would sort of be speaking of the end of history here, the end of women. Therefore, it is a notion of difference that presupposes an underlying unity or whole of sameness. The differentialist approach claims that there is a substantial difference between men and women, between feminine and masculine, and men and women answer to the distinction between feminine and masculine, and that the problem, once again, is to be found exclusively in the structure of oppression. Here again, once oppression is overcome, men and women will fall into two distinct groups, and each of these groups will themselves conform a unit whole of sameness. In the second case, men and women mean, in Collin's words, I quote, in the first case, men and women no longer mean anything. In the second case, men and women mean everything, close quote. In typical Collin fashion, she refuses to choose one option over the other and rather calls on us to take both approaches seriously, to accept that both, despite their underlying contradiction, are true by presenting the following formula. Perhaps, however, it is necessary to consider that men and women mean more than nothing and less than everything, close quote. What does it mean to mean more than nothing and less than everything? The answer to this question is key throughout all of her work. For Collin, it means to consistently refuse a metaphysics of the sexes. It means to move against the tendency to predetermine whether the difference of the sexes is nothing or whether it is everything. That is, it means to take seriously the distinction between ontology, the social construction of the sexes, and politics. In the first case, that is ontology, it is a register in which the difference of the sexes is usually defined in terms of masculine and feminine. That we will not elaborate here, but it requires that the deconstruction and displacement of the difference of the sexes in the form of the feminine and the masculine do not eliminate the actual question as to the... Do not eliminate the actual question as to the social and political positions that men and women hold. So speaking about masculine and feminine should not eliminate those social and political positions. To speak of the masculine and feminine, to suddenly theorize the feminine as the proper human condition does not necessarily answer to the contingent and absolutely urgent reality that women have less rights and suffer structural violence in relation to men. As a matter of fact, it often hides this political reality. As to the social construction of the sexes, the recognition that the way in which men and women have been qualified, or their properties, to put it somehow, are historically and culturally constructed in different forms does not necessarily lead to the conclusion that no different exists. What it does mean is that, at least until now, it has manifested differently, much like reality does, and much to feminist disappointment, that this difference has persistently operated so as to confirm the natural inferiority of women in relation to men. It is for this reason that as long as the structural oppression of women persists, there is no way of knowing if social differences will ever vanish. Finally, as to the political approach, Collin is very careful. Yes, the difference of the sexes is, as feminism has shown, a political concern of the first order. But no, it is not merely a political question. To reduce existence to politics means to reduce all thinking and action to a battle, to reduce difference to representation. It means to unreservedly fall into the logic of the dialectics of the master's slave. A truly rigorous approach to the question of the difference of the sexes must, at all time, take seriously that the difference of the sexes is, perhaps, more and also less than a political problem. It must take seriously that the dialectical master-slave logic might be inescapable for the oppressed as oppressed subjects, but also that this logic must be cut short by introducing ontological differences. It is possible to avoid the tragedy of the dominated becoming the dominators if a politics of liberation is brought together with the politics of freedom that includes a thinking of otherness. One of Collin's formulas to express this, she said, Je suis une femme, mais je n'ai pas une femme. So I am a woman, but I is not a woman. She kind of formulates it this way. Thus, to say that the difference of the sexes as presented in men and women means more than nothing and less than everything is to refuse a metaphysics of the sexes and to nonetheless take the difference grasped from its particular concrete real instantiation seriously. It means to acknowledge that we cannot predetermine if it will disappear or endure, and to focus on the fact that, insofar as it is a political concern of the first order, it is on inequality that we must focus, not on difference itself. But perhaps the only way to approach inequality is to question the status of difference as well, to examine the confusions that play out when we approach difference. This is a constant movement and displacement that we should dance to if we want to remember that in politics we must always remain vigilant, and that in life we are not reduced to our political identity. In our dance there is something of a positive order that allows us to explore being of women in other forms than in the negative structure of oppressed that we find in politics. Ultimately, ontology exceeds the political. Collin's concern, nonetheless, is primarily political. I dare say that her philosophy is a political philosophy of otherness. Praxis de la différence offers us a set of concepts that help us problematize the subject and the problem of feminism. Here, Collin reminds us of a fundamental distinction. Identity and equality are not synonymous, and neither are difference and inequality. Identity expresses something of an ontological, sometimes metaphysical order, while equality concerns something of the political order. To be equal does not mean to be identical, and political equality does not entail the homogeneity of those involved. Equality does not require a shared identity. This is key, for Collin's concern is to separate the connection between difference and inequality. To fight against inequality does not mean to erase difference, and this distinction is to be found in the heart of the subject itself, in the distinction between alteration and alienation, to which I turn to now. Alteration, as Collin understands it, is a constitutive element of the subject. The subject is not identical to itself, but is rather constructed in constant difference of itself and contains different dimensions that contradict each other, a difference that constantly sets the subject in motion. Alienation, on the other hand, is alteration as subsumed under domination. It is that subject that is reduced to its oppression, that is refused a position outside its identity as an oppressed being. In the case of women, alienation is operating when a woman is reduced to being a woman, that is, when she cannot appear if it is not as a woman, by fulfilling an idea of femininity. In other words, when a woman is constricted to the normative definition of being a woman. These two concepts are fundamental, for they explain the appearance of the unexpected subject. They explain the possibility of the step from liberation to freedom. For Collin, to liberate oneself means to fight against a reduction to a predetermined identity in your subjectivity. To be free means to be able to appear in all the complexities and contradictions inherent in the subject, within and outside political identifications. In feminist terms, if women were exclusively women, and if being woman meant exclusively being oppressed, then women would be incapable of fighting this oppression because they would be unable to recognize anything else within or outside themselves. To acknowledge the existence of oppression and fight against it as a woman means to realize that there is something of the order of the woman subject that exceeds being a woman and that nonetheless remains a woman. That there is always a remainder within that subjectivity. Alteration lies at the heart of the subject, even when this subject is alienated. Hence, to take the question of the difference of the sexes seriously means to acknowledge the social construction of the sexes, which evidences the political reality of women's oppression, without forgetting the ontological complexity of and its excess over both the sociological and political instantiations of this difference. Precisely because to answer to the question of the difference of the sexes means to be attentive to its instantiations, to how it plays out, without denying that this difference exists, whether it be temporarily in the form of the socially constructed groups of men and women and others, or indefinitely in the unending and yet for this reason unknown persistence of its socially constructed groups. The task is one that requires a constant praxis, here understood in Arendtian terms, that is, as action, as speech. I cannot go in depth to how this plays out, but I will briefly wrap it up and offer some clues. I said earlier that the difference of the sexes has become a praxis, while it used to be a metaphysics, means that it is no longer predetermined, but at stake in every relationship. It means that relationships truly understand
difference as a verb.
Wait. It means that the relationship between the sexes truly understand difference as a verb. The difference of the sexes is a constant deferring that plays out, for example, in whether a woman can appear where she is not expected, that is, as something other than the representation of a woman. Whether women between each other no longer require that a shared identity determine their differing from each other. Whether a woman is listened to, whether she assumes the responsibility of appearing, whether she contends with oppression without allowing alienation to take over alteration. All of these elements play out in praxis, understood as a relationship in which being is appearance and being exceeds all identity. This is the difference of the sexes as praxis.
Okay, so thanks, Tere. So now I proceed with the part on Hegel. So, the exercise that is now to be done is, of course, as I told, an experiment that requires us to distance ourselves from some of Hegel's passages on atrocities on women. I mean, we all saw some of them. So if we manage to reach this distance, then we might find some interesting coincidence between Françoise Collin's approach to the problematization of the difference of the sexes and Hegel's philosophy. The connection that is attempted to be established here is strictly made from the conceptual problematization of the notion of the difference of the sexes, but of the difference. So Collin's approach to the difference of the sexes is extremely rich, as you could see. So one of the main difficulties of introducing Hegel was to choose which moment or figure in his corpus to show the connection in the clearest way. I did not choose the family moment because I think it's too far away from a feminist philosophy, and it would require too much clarification and maybe too much exercise of distanciation to make the plausibility of this connection clear. Also, I chose not to approach it from the Gattung discussion because it wouldn't be adequate in the sense that it would be possible to confuse the difference of the sexes with the difference of the gender, which is not what is at stake here. And also, I chose, one thing I could do was to focus on the dialectics itself, but oh, sorry, I'm lost here. Yeah, sorry, no. So I made I'm explaining the decision, right? Yeah, sorry. So I made the decision of focusing on the dialectics of the something, the other, and the limit as a representative moment, since otherness is a key concept of Collin's proposal and is where it is explicitly introduced in the science of logic. Certainly, the topic of the talk promised an approach from the notion of the could allow. Sorry, the title itself, we promised an approach from the notion of dialectics itself, but it is one of the less clear concepts of Hegel's philosophy, I think. So I didn't really want to drive the discussion into Hegel's notion of dialectics itself, because we will be forgetting what is at stake here. So, also taking Collin into account, the Collin's claim of the difference of the sexes as a praxis in terms of speech and action, it could have been approached from the transition to the revealed religion and absolute spirit in the phenomenology, for example, also in the Bürgerlichkeit figures, but this is another paper that it would be really interesting to do, so yeah, but I mean, it's just to clarify from where I'm approaching Hegel. So, to begin with, let us focus on Collin's, and Collin's quote as it is written in Praxis of the Difference. I think that the core approach of her characterization of the difference of the sexes as it is presented in this text of the Praxis of the Difference is the following one, and I'm quoting her, where she says, perhaps, however, it is necessary to consider that men and women mean more than nothing and less than everything. I mean that maybe everything is at stake here. So this quote from Françoise Collin's Practice of the Difference can be connected, or I think it's at least funny to do it, with the beginning of the science of logic. So the pure being. So I I quote Hegel here to just, let him speak now, open quote. So, being pure being, without further determination. In its indeterminate immediacy, it is equal only to itself and also not unequal with respect to another. It has no difference within it, nor any outwardly. If any determination or content were posited in it as distinct, it would fail to hold fast to its purity. Being the undeterminate immediate is in fact nothing, and neither more nor less than nothing. So, what we have now is nothing, pure nothingness. It is simple equality with itself, complete emptiness, complete absence of determination and content, lack of distinction within. However, to intuit or to think nothing has therefore meaning, and so nothing is concretely exist in our intuiting or thinking, or rather, it is the empty intuiting and thinking itself, like pure being. Nothing is therefore the same determination, or rather absence of determination, and thus altogether the same as what pure being is. Close quote. So, I consider these two first moments of the science of logic as an analogous to Collin's characterization of the problem. So, we depart from a totalizing, universalizing position in Collin's terms. That is, which would be from the everything of Collin's quote. So this everything in Hegel's case is pure being. Pure being, as we all know, is characterized by not allowing any determination within it. That is, any differentiation, particularization, or nuance, because it is unilateral and totalizing in its purity. However, it does not allow any determination. It does not have any quality, feature, property, etc. Therefore, it is nothing. The nothing of Collin's fragment corresponds obviously to Hegel's pure nothing, which pure being vanished to. With this beginning, we have two consequences. In the first place, it is dissolved into nothing. And the second place, the difference of the sexes then is pure unilateral hypostatization. So the two main problematic conceptions of the difference that Collin criticized. Hence, Hegel's approach could be also represented by the question put above. Could the difference between pure being and pure nothing mean more than nothing and less than everything? This vanishing of one into another turns out to be a moment that is followed by the movement of becoming that makes explicit that pure being and pure nothing at least constitute a dynamic relation of one vanishing into the other. This kind of relation that has appeared generates a mediation from which that pure being and pure nothing are also potentially distinct. With that, I quote becoming. So, and Hegel talking about becoming. So, becoming is the unseparatedness of being and nothing. As the unity of being and nothing, it is rather this determinate unity, or one in which being and nothing equally are. However, inasmuch as being and nothing are are each unseparated from each other, each is not. So they are together, but now as distinguished moments. Close quote. So, in Hegel's analysis of the relation of being and nothing as the most basic structures of existence, Dasein, when they hold together in the moment of becoming, they do not vanish one into another anymore. The introduction of a distinction or proto-differentiation between pure being and pure nothing is what allows the development of the categories to move on and avoids to getting stuck in the movement of becoming, which in Collin's terms would be to be stuck between universalist and differentialist approaches of the difference of the sexes. So, Collin's approach, as Teresa explained, did not consist in focusing on defining difference, again, as a totalization, but to lead the question to an examination of the confusions and presuppositions that play out when we approach the difference. So, in Hegelian terms, to avoid remaining stuck in the presented dichotomy of becoming by exploring the transformation and misunderstandings that every position of different entails along the dialectical development of the categories. So, the avoidance of the unilateral identification between pure being and pure nothing succeeds in the chapter of the logic determinate the second one, the determinate being, Dasein or existence. It is translated in so many different ways. So the thing is that positing the da into the Sein introduces a limit that avoids from the very beginning the unilateral identification between pure being and pure nothing. That is, it forces a difference between them. Okay, sorry, it's fine. Thank you. Thank you, sorry. Yeah. So it forces a difference between them, which is what will introduce qualitatively determinate beings, that is, some things. Sorry? No? It's not working? No, it is. Now? Yes? Okay. Sorry. Do you want to go a little bit behind or? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'll do it. Okay, so. Yeah, should we wait?
Maybe, sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, we can wait. It's not a big deal.
Mama.
Hi.
I think you can continue.
Okay. Sorry. So, yeah, it's working?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, good. So positing the, yeah, I'll go back. So positing the da into the Sein, what does is to introduce a limit that avoids from the very beginning the unilateral identification between pure being and pure nothing. That is, it forces a difference between them, which is what will introduce qualitatively determinate beings, that is, somethings. So, the something is, yeah? No, something's not working.
Sorry.
Yeah? Okay. Should I proceed?
No. I'm really sorry.
It's all right.
Mic's run out of battery.
Hi? Yes, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'll start the section. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, I'll go back, yeah. So, yeah. The avoidance, the thing is that, okay, what avoids the unilateral identification between pure being and pure nothing succeeds in the next chapter of the logic, the chapter of determinate being, Dasein, by the fact that with positing a da into the Sein, what does is to introduce a limit that avoids from the very beginning from the very beginning of the logic, the unilateral identification between pure being and pure nothing. That is, it forces a difference between them, which is what will introduce qualitatively determinate beings, that is, somethings. The something is a determinate being, a Dasein, but in order to be so, it also requires its negation, that is, its other. Sorry, not a Dasein, an etwas. Also requires its negation, that is, its other. Otherwise, it would not be a determined, and for this reason, it would be negated as a determination and vanish again into nothing. The first position of the something is exclusively given to the moment of being, to be pure affirmation. So the negative moment of nothing is not present in the something itself, but outside it, as another. This causes a tension within the something, which entails the fact that it is not exclusively constituted from its simple positivity, but precisely from where it is not present, its non-being for an other. So there is a limit that has the function of differentiating the something from the other and keeping them as determinations. So the possibility for something to be something depends on having a limit. With that, the limit has two functions. In the first place, it has the function to tie something with the other, which is that the limit connects something and other by showing the relationship as a constitutive one. Something needs the other in order to be something, so the other is something's other. On the other hand, it has the function to untie, separate, differentiate something from the other. The incursion of the border or the limit is precisely what avoids the identification between something and other as a wedge that prevents us from closing the door with the keys inside. So for this reason, the moment of the limit has also the function of differentiating the something from its other. So the limit is a wedge that keeps something and other as different, but at the same time relates them in their difference without identifying them in the same terms of being and nothing. It is by establishing an active differentiation between something and other that constitutes them as what they are. So what we have now is a relational comprehension of the constitution of the something and the other, in the sense that they are constituted by the relation of limitation and therefore differentiation. There is an other that is never in the place of the something, but that the something needs to be considered as a something. However, in its turn, the other is not pure negativity anymore. It has its own determinacy as the other of the something. So in this sense, it can also be seen as a something. So diachronically, the other can be considered as a something, and the first something can be considered the other of the other, so it makes it a something. However, synchronically, the other is never equally placed as the something. The relation between something and other is a relation of asymmetry. So regardless of who occupies the place of the other, the relation is not a horizontal one. So, which is shown in Collin's words in the fact that, in open quotes, I can perhaps, this asymmetry between between something and other, that, okay, you can see the other as a something because it's not pure being and pure nothing, but at the same time that they cannot occupy the same place, so there's a relation of asymmetry because the other is left as other. There's a negation there, like just as a wedge a little bit, can be clearly represented or expressed with Collin's words in the fact that, and I open quote, I can perhaps die for the other, but never in place of the other. So, yeah. So, from my understanding of it, the structure of the limit can be considered analogous to Collin's notion of difference. So now I'm starting to sew a little bit the connection, which is, I think, the most complicated part of the thing. So, in the first place, the limit allows the overcoming of the first immediate form of negative position, in which, for something to be opposed, it claims that everything that is not it is opposed to it, and therefore must exclude it. Such a relationship would be one that could be expressed with the fallacy that you are with me or against me, or even be related to the notion of dialectics that Collin criticized, which is not exactly Hegel's, which consisted in reducing the difference of the sexes as the battle of the sexes. This unilateral relation of exclusivity, or exclusion better, also shows the universalist approach to the difference of the sexes, in the sense that not only from the standpoint of men, but also from the standpoint of the feminists, the category women would be defined exclusively by being opposed against men. This would have two terrible consequences. In the first place, that they would be falling over alienations, since alienation also in Collin's terms. Alienation, since they would be defining its being or its essence in its entirety for the fact of being oppressed, so to be a woman is to be oppressed. Or they would be essentializing it again in the sense that to be a woman will be overcome in the sense that she takes over the space of the dominant, that is, when she becomes man. So to overcome the situation of oppressed is reproducing or replacing the role of the dominant, so still following over in the same problem. However, the limit and thus the hypothesization of the something favored by this opposition by entering the scene the other everything that was excluded. That is, to give presence to the other by opening up its role in the something's constitution. It is also due to the other that something is. However, this standpoint is to be included with careful eyes in the sense that it could be interpreted as falling into the second problem of the difference of the sexes, which would be its dissolution. Since other and something can be switched somehow, so the difference of the sexes is also something relative construction, so it can be dissolved somehow. But this is, we think that it's not happening. And so the difference between something and other would be dissolved and they vanish. I mean, if we interpret it in this way, it's an analogous problem of something and other vanishing again and not just switching places. So we will fall back to the first, to the beginning of the logic. However, the presence of the limit does not fulfill the same scheme as pure nothing and pure being, because now there is a limit wedge that does not let them fully vanish from one into the other. So the presence of the limit can be considered as being analogous to Collin's notion of alteration, which is, as we just seen above, points to the issue that the subject is not identical to itself, but is rather constructed in a constant difference of itself and contains different dimensions that contradict each other, a difference that constantly sets the subject in motion. Nevertheless, by locating the difference at the center in this manner, that is, understanding it as a fixed wedge, emerges again the risk of retotalizing it. An example of this totalization would be to draw the analogy in the following way. Man is non-woman and woman is non-man, but in their difference, they define the specific space of each other in a relation of horizontality and complementarity. They complement each other in order to form a higher and more perfect unity, like middle oranges or something like that, which is, I think, or maybe Hegel's idea of family, depending on how you understand it, but we know that it's much more complex. So this standpoint is also a conflictive with Collin's approach of the difference of the sexes and also for Hegel's dialectics of the limit, since the relation between the something and the other is not a horizontal one. Certainly, the other is not mere nothing, but also has its determinacy, so in its turn is also a something. However, when the focus is on the other's somethingness, the first something then is transformed as an other. This implies that women and men are both other depending from where the relationship is approached. So something and other never appear as two somethings at the same time. Hence, in terms of Collin, the woman is the other and it cannot and should not appear as the same something as seen above, since until now she does not have a space in the realm of the something, which also entails that she does not have a space to become herself a something. It would entail again a situation of universalization in Collin's terms or alienation taking place over alterations, which is the real danger here. As seen, the issue, and I'm about to finish, don't worry. As seen, the issue is women have kept as another that cannot trespass the limit of the space of the something. However, it does not imply that it is an essential fixed feature of women. And this is extremely important. That is, in Collin's terms, the issue is to deal with oppression without allowing alienation to take over alteration. As Teresa explained, the solution that Collin suggests is to treat the difference of the sexes as apraxis, in the sense that what is to be done is not to find a fixed and pre-established definition, as the categories of the understanding would do from Hegel's standpoint, but to focus on how this difference is instantiated and transformed in every relationship that is held, which for Hegel could be understood as adopting the speculative standpoint from which the instantiation and transformations of the limit can be grasped. So, to finish, the difference of the sexes as a praxis has to do, as Teresa explained, with understanding action and speech that includes the other, in its recognition that it has always been placed as the other. As Collin writes in the Praxis de la Différence, it is better to say to a woman, I can't hear you, than to say you say nothing, or what you say is nothing, because here there is at least an admission of some type of listening. So it is by recognizing women as other that they may have the space to appear. Thank you. We moderate ourselves, or we could, I mean.
Would it be possible to turn on the lights so that I can see them properly? Because right now I'm like, I know Andrea's there, but
yeah,
I can't really tell.
Yeah. Andrea. Okay.
Oh, there you are.
Oh,
Isn't that nice?
Thank you so much for this rich and suggestive talk. It was really I had a lot of thoughts in connection with it, and I wanted to ask two questions. And the first concerns the relationship of Collin to Beauvoir, and it seems like there's something. I mean, I know we talked a little bit about this already, but it seems like there's a similar appropriation of a Hegelian distinction that appears in the introduction to the second sex in terms of subject and other. And she's defining it as it is a hierarchical relationship because it doesn't go the other way, right? So she says in most other contexts, you're an other for me and I'm an other for you. So there's something kind of symmetrical. But that's not the case in the situation of women. And so I'm wondering if one of the limitations of Beauvoir's appropriation of this Hegelian distinction, or some version of it, is that it ends up defining women as those who are othered in this absolute sense. And so it's a version of the thesis that to be a woman is to be oppressed. So that was my first question. And the other question concerns another aspect of Hegel's thought that might be useful in supporting Collin's suggestion. And I was thinking about something, Teresa, that you said, that we don't know whether all difference will vanish if oppression ends. So there's something kind of like unanticipated. Mm-hmm. There's an element of the future that remains undetermined. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking that that's actually quite congenial to Hegel's thought, because he doesn't think that the future is a proper object of philosophical theorizing precisely because it is unknown and undetermined. And I was also thinking of Catherine Malabou's notion of plasticity there in connection with this future open-endedness that's a part of Hegel's philosophical project.
Much. Okay. Yes. In relation to Beauvoir, Collin's being a little bit unfair here in the way. How to phrase this? She's not. So Collin, the way Beauvoir has been understood, read generally, mostly by a certain movement of feminism, where we're not actually reading Collin, but picking up Collin as it was being told. That is the main problem, that you reduce women, being a woman, to an oppression. And I think one of the main concerns by feminists of the second half of the last century is to try to at least pose the idea that there's some positivity to being a woman. From Collin's perspective, it is not a positivity that should be defined, because then we're once again determining it, and then saying to be a woman means to be able to do this, but at least leave that option open. In the 1990s and 2000s, Collin does return to Beauvoir and reads her more in detail, and for example focuses on Beauvoir's how she treats pain and how she treats like the way, you know, she feels deception in a way, and shows that that Beauvoir's understanding is a lot more complex and a lot more nuanced if we don't take like just the general idea and say this is what she's saying, but actually read her in detail. So she does keep that in mind.
I can do can I do a Hegelian remark on that?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, I think that what is interesting in Collin, and to put this, I mean, the relation between the one and the other, the something and the other, from a Hegelian perspective, at least from the logic on the limit, is precisely that the limit admits, or what I find interesting is that the limit admits that men can be other in different occasions, different contexts, but still, from the focus on the relation, I mean, if we want to abstract the relation, it's an asymmetrical one, but it doesn't mean that with what we feel it, better from where we approach a difference cannot be like in both ways. So I think that the nice thing is that you instantiate that there is an instantiation of a relation of asymmetry, but at the same time it allows enough flexibility for not falling into the Beauvoir's reduction, as I would see it. Yeah, I mean.
And yeah.
And the second one, or no?
We do una cosa. I want to.
Tira.
I think it's interesting what you're saying, because it's something that I didn't emphasize because there was no time. But Collin was very Arendtian, and Arendt's notion of politics has to do with the unexpected. It has to do with her notion of action as something that is begun, but we don't know what the consequences are going to be. The intentionality is more or less irrelevant in the sense that this is out there and we're going to see. And Collin's notion of politics is very attached to this. Well, that's how she understands politics as of a certain moment, which is when she starts reading Arendt. And it also makes her, that's why she's so careful when she talks about politics. That's why she says we need to be very vigilant. It's not a matter of saying, women are this, men are these, this is what's happening, let's throw these laws and make this work this way and just forget about it. It's going to be fixed. It's like, no, we need to be constantly there because we don't know what's going to happen with what we do in our resistance and strategies against these oppressions. We need to be constantly at play. So in that sense, I think it's interesting, you know, that you're understanding it through Hegel, and she's very much from an Arendtian understanding of politics, even though I think she does make it more complex because it's like, all right, this is from a political perspective, but we do need to keep in mind the ontological perspective, the social perspective, like all of this, not the social as Arendt understands it, it's more of the sociological. And we need to put that there. But you wanted to say something else?
No, I mean, the second, do you think that we answered the second question? Okay, so it's fine.
Yeah, thank you. What you said about Françoise Collin made me think about Jacques Rancière, when he said that subjectivation of workers or women is some kind of désidentification or unidentification. In French, it's désidentification. And it means that women are subjectified as a political subject when they don't act as we expect that they are acting or thinking. And it's the same thing for the workers. So just my question is very simple. Did they know each other, or is there some mutual influence between Collin and Rancière? I'm just curious too.
I mean, she definitely read him. She doesn't quote him though, I would say, but yes, she read him. And I think, you know, I should read Rancière more in detail to be able to tell you like exactly what the difference is, but I do think that what is interesting about Collin is that throughout this article of Praxis de la Différence, she really makes it a point to make the woman subject a problem of subjectivity at large. So it's not just women that experience this identification, but it's rather an experience of subjectivity in general. It's just that in the way, like how do we explain the emergence of feminism? Precisely because subjectivity is alterated. And women are also alienated. And it is in this game where the subject of feminism as an unexpected subject that breaks with a notion of the natural dimension of women as men and women, and this is natural, it is a fact, we can't argue against what women are. That is, it's not only something that happens to women, but it's something that happens to everyone. So I think that's what's interesting. She always does this. So she will focus on women or on a feminist problem to draw it towards a philosophical problem and say, and in a way what she's saying is we keep doing the same thing, which is thinking that feminism is enclosed within the problem of women and it's not philosophical per se. So what she does is constantly draw you towards, this is a problem of feminism. Feminism is putting this on the table. This is extremely relevant for the movement itself, but it's also a philosophical, and it is a philosophical problem. So I think that's also, I don't know how Rancière does it, so I can't really, probably not, but we can talk about it later and we can see how we can put that together.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. I would like to react a bit on what Bruna said about the idea of using the concept of limit for defining the two, the distinction of the difference of the sexes, because, well, I think it's very interesting, because, and I'd like your opinion. I will say something, and I would like your. Hegel is reconstructing the idea of something and something else, and he ends up with the idea of limit. What is the limit? In a way, it is this thing that divides two similar things, not two different things in a way. If they are completely different, there's no limit between them. If there are limits, in a way, between similar things. He says, well, you can't have a limit between two qualitatively different things. There's no limit between, I don't know, the terrain as an example, of lions and antelopes, but there is a limit between the terrain of these lions and the other lions, these antelopes and the other antelopes. Why I say that? Because it's the same word, Grenze, that means frontier in German. And Hegel is claiming in his philosophy of history that there are no natural frontiers. This was a theory of the French, that the Pyrenees is a natural frontier between Spain and France, and that the Rhine is a natural frontier between France and Germany. And he's first claiming that, well, rivers are uniting and not separating people. I mean, the same people live of the two ufers, two banks of a river. And then he is claiming in general that there is this concept has no meaning of a natural frontier. So it is always conventional. Maybe you could use this idea. I mean, if a limit is something that when we apply it to human things is not natural, but conventional, well, it's interesting, isn't that?
I think it's a very difficult question that lives and that needs a lot of, I think it needs a lot of decisions. At least the limit as it is treated in the chapter of Dasein, I think it's much more less conditioned or filled with content in this sense. So to answer to your question, it already means, I think, to choose with what we want to fill it. So I think that it could admit both of your, natural frontiers or socially constructed dimension. In the sense, but this, I really don't know how to approach it. I mean, if it's to treat specifically the difference of the sexes, I wouldn't go there. Definitely. I mean, I wouldn't transform the limit to, I wouldn't fill the limit with these two different contents, because I think that it would be changing at least the debate on what I want to point here. with using the notion of the limit. That the limit divides two similar things. I don't remember reading this, so if you can just...
Yes, well, I worked on this topic.
Okay.
Construction, I think, yes.
Yeah, I mean...
If you oppose it, it's not anymore something and something else. It's not etwas und anderes. It is on both sides. So on both sides, you have the same things that appear, and the difference is between the limit and what is limited on both sides. So the limit is, from this point of view, same. It has interesting. I mean, if you see the logic as a reconstruction of the concepts, and in a way something that helps you to understand how you could use them in a right way for other purposes.
Yeah.
Well, this point of view, I felt yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to think...
Shed some light on his opposition to natural frontiers, and maybe could be useful.
Yeah, I should think more about it. I wanted also to say, I mean, to clarify a little bit, I mean, just to make you understand my conception of the limit, but I was using the limit instead of dialectics in the first way, in the first place because dialectics is a complicated concept and I didn't want to, and because it could be done from dialectics, I think, all this thing with Collin. But because it's, I mean, we would be discussing on Hegel's notion of dialectics. The thing is that in my MA thesis, I sustained that the moment of the limit is the first really dialectical moment of the whole logic, and that everything, I mean, because there's like this instantiation of the difference that of course unifies but also differentiates, and it's in this differentiation that constitutes, so in this sense we agree. The thing is that I think that you are asking me how to fill it more, so yeah, but yeah, anyway. Do you want to say something?
Well, if I understood it correctly, what you were proposing would be that so that limit would be conventional. That's what you said, no? It would be convention rather than natural. Did I understand?
The way Hegel uses the concept of limit is, when applied to countries, is that it is conventional.
Okay.
Because it can only unify through dividing, so it can only divide humans from humans and not humans from lions, for example, or something else. So it can only be between similar, in this way, things.
And you were proposing that this would be useful to think the difference of the sexes, if I am correct or not? Or you were just addressing...
Okay.
Denaturalizes the thing.
Right, but what I think Collin would answer to that is that we would be so it is interesting because what I understand you're saying is that convention is necessary. We cannot be rid of it. It will be there. So in a way, no? Right, so the problem with going for it is purely conventional. It would be that if that convention turns out to be erasable, it's almost like saying it's basically socially constructed, there's nothing else there. And Collin is asking us to remain skeptical, to remain that we don't know if it is purely conventional. We must make sure of that. So,
in a way we could say in Hegelian terms, disposited by freedom.
All right, I'll have to think about it. I'll have to think about it.
Yeah, but I think that it's a lot of steps further of what we are trying to approach here.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Thanks so much for your talk. This was really really a lot of ideas are in a way in my head, and I still think about them. So I have two comments rather, maybe, or one comment and one question. The comment is, I thought maybe it might also be helpful maybe to look at Hegel's account of definition, because he's so strongly against some fixed definitions, and I think it would fit with what you said about not thinking of woman as something that should be defined, but the definition must exactly left behind, and we must understand it as a praxis. And the question now is, do you think, so maybe it's still on the relation between Collin and Hegel, so do you think Hegel somehow provides some kind of tool in order to understand or to further elaborate on what was being said on sexual difference? And could one then say that it's not only that one could use the kind of logic you developed not only for sexual difference, but maybe also for other oppositions or differences? Yeah, thanks.
It's a very good question. And yeah, I mean, the first comment, I mean, yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, to approach it from definition, I mean, it didn't come into my mind, so I will definitely check it out because I think it's yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right that it could be really interesting to do it. In the second place, it's interesting because on the one hand, I think that Hegel's approach on the limit and so on can be applied. I mean, it depends if we, it can be applied to other oppositions or other, kinds of, exactly. But at the same time, I chose the moment of the limit and not other ones. I tried to make it, like fit to Collin's proposal, but with the idea in mind that it's like a stair for a Hegelian public to just be be approached or to bring you closely to Collin's approach, because the terminology is very different. Alienation is something absolutely different and things like that. But the thing is that I think that the problem that Collin's pointing is very understandable and interesting, most of it interesting for a Hegelian public that is interested in the notion of the difference of the sexes, but I think that it needs to do like a step more, like a little bit like in the phenomenology, to elevate the Hegelian scholar to the perspective of Françoise Collin's notion of sexes of difference of the sexes. So this was a little bit the idea, yes.
Just a short follow-up. So, yeah, great. So it would be more like reading Hegel through the lens of Françoise Collin than the other way around, because the other way around would be like, difficult. Okay,
but as to, I mean, Collin was not very fond of Hegel.
No.
She basically criticizes him, but she was the first philosopher to write a dissertation on Maurice Blanchot. And in her dissertation on Maurice Blanchot, she does have a whole discussion comparing Blanchot and Hegel, and the question of negativity, the negative, the neutral. Like she was trained in that type of thinking, but she attributes it more to Blanchot and the question of writing, l'écriture, and how language operates there than she does to Hegel. So we can sort of trace the genealogy that goes there. It's just that I think, I mean, I'm not in favor of being completely loyal to the philosopher I study. So it's like, well, she was Hegelian in this sense, and that's it. I don't really care what she would think about it. But I think what her approach is from Blanchot, and she does make a distinction with Hegel there. And I think there is a connection as a sort of, as a scholar with Hegel.
Yeah, and I'll just, as a small comment, the thing is that also, I mean, I think that she opposed Blanchot a lot to Hegel because the Hegel she learned or read was the Goethe's Hegel, which is a very particular one. So I think that for a more contemporary Hegel, how Hegel is now approached, maybe Collin wouldn't be so angry with him, or I mean,
I don't know. It's her. Yeah, it's her.
Yes, I too will insist on the question of limit. Now, I apologize, I have a very vague recollection about the logic, but the way I do remember the concept of limit, Grenze, as opposed to Beschränkung, is that the limit is purely external. And the Beschränkung, it involves a certain self-positing.
yes.
It is so, Applied to the difference of sexes, does it has implication that then there is no self-positing in the? Or does it not mean that the man and the woman would then exhaust logical space? That there is only this because they're purely externally determined? I mean, I just find it slightly, perhaps a bit kind of strong that there is no self-determination, and it's also that, well, among other things, it also means that there is all there is because they can be only. I mean, if there is two things that only determine each other by being limited, then there is no place for anything else, not in content, and So I'll just.
Yeah. I understand the question. I think you're changing the. I mean. Okay. You are bringing the discussion. I mean, of the difference of the sexes and so on to, purely Hegelian. I mean, how does it work in Hegel's system and things like that. I didn't want to do that. It's fine. It's legitimate. I mean, it fits. What I would say is that, well, maybe on the self-determination you could. I can tell you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I liked of the concept of limit is that it's a relational constitutivity. So, and it's the same. I mean, I think that you can correct me if I say this wrong, but for Collin, the main thing of the difference of the sexes is that there is like instantiation of the difference in the sense that it has to be taken into account because it is a fact. But it is all the time defined or shown, presented in relational terms, not in substantializing, totalizing terms. So I think that if I would have used the Schranke is the limit from the inside the something. So the something, it can be understood that the something, from the perspective of the something, it understands that it is limited, so from the inside. And I don't think that, I mean, of course, this is how in Hegel works, and if I would write a paper specific on Hegel and the difference of the sexes approached in this way, I should take into account, and I think it would be much more complicated, but what I wanted was to show. I mean, to support the Collin, so, yeah.
I think it's important to point out, and this is something I sometimes forget when I'm writing my dissertation because I'm so set on explaining that it's not this, it's not that the difference of the sexes for Collin is not only between men and women, it's also between women. So sexuation is different between women. Like, it's not a difference that only holds between men and women. It also is between a woman and herself. So when she speaks of difference, it is everywhere. It's a little bit, and this is where it comes in with the praxis. That is also why in my dissertation I do like 100 pages on the Cahier du Rive, the journal she founded, and the practices that were in that journal, because there you really understand how a relationship between women, among women, constitutes that being woman as well. It's not only a difference that is between men and women. And another thing that I would like to say, that I remember I had a friend, Pablo, who's probably listening right now, who one day, I also, a year ago I think it was, I made a presentation and one of the people was saying, yeah, but you're saying that there are men and women and that's all there is. And I remember it was like, no, you can, so Collin will tell you there are men and women, but she's not telling you there are only men and women. She's saying there are men and there are women, and there seems to be a difference, and we should try to figure out what the difference is, because there is a relationship of oppression, so it is in that sense a political concern. But we cannot reduce it to a political concern if we want to be rigorous with how we approach it. So I think that's one of the things as well with Bruna when we talked about it, or even when I read her, I was like, it can be very easily totalized to men and women, to groups, and here we find a difference. But she's concerned about that difference specifically, but it doesn't mean that that is all there is. I think this is something that should be, which doesn't mean you're going to find her speaking about other differences in her work in general. But she does say it's not necessarily all there is. I think that's important. Thank you so much for the question, by the way, because it did allow me to point this out again.
Well, thank you. I would like to suggest something to think about this suspicion that it may be a conventional idea. I remember, as hearing you speaking about this, I remember Oyeronke Oyemi. I think that's the name. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a Nigerian anthropologist who thinks the idea of a woman, I think that the name of the book is The Invention of Women, Making an African Sense of Western Gender. And she tries to think that the very notion of woman, and of course of men, are a colonial one, imposed in all over the world. And she tries to prove this by presenting this Yoruba society before the colonization without presuppose that there is this gender division there. And she claims it to be a mistake, that we presuppose these categories that are not there in their societies. And so she tries to present as a whole different way of how social roles are distributed, but without this gender, at least the way we understand it, based on anatomically way and so, a whole different society. So I think that it might be interesting to think this suggestion to think about this Grenze as a conventional division, because it may be, it may be. So maybe there is nothing else at all, and we are just using that. Another claim that she presents is that it is so deep in our culture through centuries that we forget that it wasn't there forever. That's not a necessary concept. Maybe today it is because the whole oppression was built on it, but we can think on a society that is not built through this grenze, to this different gender roles and so on. That's just a suggestion. I don't know what you think about it.
I'm looking forward to going to anthropology when I'm finally done with my dissertation, because there's a lot of things there that I think would be very challenging for me. I think I could answer a little bit from Collin's perspective. Different parts. So, yes, I think Collin is from a generation of women who did try to find other, like, a previous time or even other places where this kind of oppression wasn't operating. And much to their disappointment, once they reached the 1990s, they're like, that's it. We're doomed. Like, there's no previous moment or other place where this hasn't operated this way. Obviously, this could be criticized. I do think, however, that I would need to go to those books and try to see, because I think that Collin's approach, by saying that it is not conventional, or by putting that in suspense, she's also pointing out that it's not so easy to change. So one of the problems about defining it as conventional is that it's understood as, all right, so we're just going to make it that we do this thing this way, and that happens that way, and that's it. It's all changed. And we all know that's not true. We've all read...
Sorry, but language is conventional, and you can't change it. It's not so easy to change a convention.
I know. I'm completely with you. But what I mean is that there's also... So when... I think this is also what makes her interesting. She was not only a philosopher scholar, she was also a feminist who was constantly engaged in many feminist groups where her public was not, were not philosopher scholars. So if you did, which does not mean that they were stupid, obviously, it just meant that there were some very technical words or ways to approach things that were not that easy to make happen. So in that sense, I think she's also, you could take it from that place of, yes, but let's keep it in suspense because we need to keep, because convention, it gets to a point where it is almost natural. It's not, but it gets to that point.
Yeah, just to make an appointment, I think that we don't need to deny the oppression I'm thinking about racism, for example. Race is also being discussed at if it exists or not, but the fact is racism exists, and we don't have to deny it. I think it's the same with the concept of a woman. Sexism exists, machismo exists. We don't have to deny it, but maybe the concept of woman has problems in itself.
Yeah, but it's always the same. Maybe
the
concept of men as well. So what she's doing as well is saying, let's give women some sort of positivity so that we all, because I'm serious, I've had this, sorry, I just got a little bit worked up. but it's true, every time I hear her speak about this, it's always the definition of women, and maybe women is something that we can change. And it's like, well, why don't we start talking about men change? Like the definition of men. And we do it implicitly, we're doing that, but the focus is always on women changing. And what they're trying to say, I think, these were women who really did live the feminist movement, who were philosophers, who were in contexts where they were being like excluded for being women. And what they're saying is, at least let's give some type of positivity to being a woman, because clearly in all of these contexts, I'm only understood from a negative perspective. And even within feminism, which is what is supposed to give me the strength and to give me that resistance space, I am still understood as a negative. So I think I agree with you, and I do think it might happen, and I'm not against it. I just think it's important also from a philosophical perspective, because when you do read the history of philosophy, as it is in Europe, in the Western world, all of these definitions of feminine, masculine, women, men are like ingrained. They go so deep. So if you're gonna be trying to approach that, I think you need to be very careful with how you approach it. I mean, I think that's also one of the things about Collin that makes her interesting, but also very confusing sometimes, which is that it's not always clear if she's talking about like the history of ideas or if she's now talking about the feminist movement as it was happening at that moment. But I do think that from a philosophical perspective, from the history of ideas, it is important to keep that in mind. Yeah. Because otherwise, as always, it is women that are raised, and we talked about that, no? Well, if women is not a category, it's unimportant as a category, then, well, why are we gonna go check out what Wollstonecraft said? Mostly when she's being reduced to being a woman, when she did a lot more things than just defend the rights of women. Well, that sounded horrible, but besides defending the rights of women. So I think it's this. Sorry, I got a little bit. Thank you so much, though. It's really helpful. And I am serious when I say that I'm looking forward to going to anthropology and reading so much there, because I think it'll be really interesting for me.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very enlightening talk. I have if I understood it correctly, and there was a category which belongs to both of this way of thinking of the sexual difference, and namely it was the overcoming construction, if I understood it correctly.
Overcoming oppression.
Oppression?
Yeah.
Okay, then
oppression.
you can forget my question. I understood it, overcoming construction. I wonder
oppression.
What is overcoming construction?
No, it's oppression.
Oppression.
Yeah.
I have a question. Well, thank you for your talk. I was thinking of Collin's and what you said, that the difference between man and woman is wider. It includes many other relations. But if we do this, there is always a trap of falling, erasing it. And then there is another claim, and this is dangerous, I think. And then there is another line of reasoning that was brought up, and it says the other must be recognized. So these two parts seem to not go together. Maybe they do, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say. And there was the difference between theory and praxis also evoked. So is this the way to solve it? Thank you. I'm interested what you both have to say.
I'll do the last one really quick. I don't know there's no distinction. There is sort of, but Collin does understand theory and practice as going together. So praxis as a praxis also has to do with thought and theory. It's not like there's theory, there's practice, and then we have to see the relationship. I don't know if that's what you were asking, but no?
It's just that this particular question I posed, she then resolves through praxis. I didn't mean that there is this general opposition.
Okay.
Theory and praxis.
Yeah, the reason why she reaches this problem is because there is a praxis. So it's always intertwined. It is because she's engaged in the feminist movement as a practice, and in the philosophy, like there is a praxis constantly that the problem comes up and then goes back. Like there's no real like, okay, we've got this problem and we solve it through a praxis, and this is going to be the praxis. It's always very related. No sé si jo puc dir alguna cosa, però si vols
Sí, jo crec que I think it's a question for you mainly.
Okay.
I mean, I could, but I think it's, yeah.
If we open it, we erase it, you mean if we open the difference not only between men and women, but also between women? Maybe over time. I think what Collin, through her experience, what she's telling us is that we actually don't. So, one of the ways that we could say that we, if I understand your question properly, that we don't erase it is that through relationships between women, we also discover similarities and differences. And these similarities and differences do have to do with being a woman and in relation to men as well. But they are, at that moment, they appear between women. That's what she's saying as well. What she's trying to break here, to fracture here, I think, is a notion of the feminine or of femininity that could basically explain all of women. And what she's saying is, no, like this is a lot more dynamic. I understand where you're going, I'll have to think about it, but I think it's also important to see. And as to the other must be recognized, I think here there was a bit of a problem between the vocabulary I would use and the vocabulary Bruna uses. So I would not say that the other must be recognized. Also because Collin's, as I mentioned earlier, Collin's understanding of politics is from Arendt, and recognition is not, it's questionable because how do you appear if you're not being seen? But it's not a structure of recognition that Collin is appealing to when she talks about the other. So I think here, we had a bit of a clash between terminologies.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you could raise, a problem that, okay, I'm like throwing stones into my own bag.
Good. That's part of the fun.
But it has to do with with your, your first questions and the two questions, because I think that also the claim of widening the difference of the sexes can entail its dissolution. I wouldn't say no, in the sense that it's also to grasp the different instantiations in practice that this difference acquires. So in the sense...
Yeah, and if it is finally dissolved, I don't think it's a problem. The problem is to presuppose its dissolution. For Collin.
But I was trying to point something, different. It's fine. It's also a claim, but the thing is that there's a problem here, and it is related to Collin's Blanchot dissertation and the critique of from Blanchot, from the standpoint of Blanchot to Hegel, that for Hegel there is no space between something and other. So, in this sense, my claim was, is complicated. I think we might find we could criticize Blanchot's reading of Hegel, but I think it's quite, and most of it, if you use as I did, the dialectics of the limit, something another, it can be really difficult to grasp it, that there can be space between the something and the other. However, I think that if we analyze carefully the negation of the negation and how this return to the first something, when the negation of the negation works, we might be able to break this unity. But I mean, it's actually very interesting, I think.
Thank you. So, do we have any more questions? If not, then okay. Well, thank you for your talk, and we'll begin with the new session as it is on the timetable. So at 1, yes.
All right.
Okay.
Right.